G'day, I'm Oscar. I'm the designer of the tabletop RPG Driven into Darkness, RPG that's currently in development. I'm going to talk about death in Driven into Darkness and other RPGs, and how I like to handle the process of death and dying, and the story of that. Well, let's first talk about old tabletop role-playing games. So in old tabletop role-playing games, health or hit points were literally all you had, and 0 meant dead. 0 was truly 0. And that went out of fashion eventually. just the styles of the games changed. People wanted more closure, more of a process to dying, despite how unfair that really makes the game in a tactical board game sense compared to how the enemies function, because they often function in the way that old school RPGs did, where 0 was 0 and 0 is dead, whereas players or the player characters have a certain level of immunity to this finality. In a lot of ways, the function of 0 being dead is good. It's very simple, very easy to understand, especially for people that have never played a tabletop RPG or any kind of video game that doesn't have this extended layer beyond 0 hit points. You can see it in the difference between original first-person shooter type games like Halo and the more recent entries. The original games being very old school, 0 is 0, dead is dead, whereas the new entries adopting lots of modern death and recovery mechanics, including the one where 0 means down on the floor crawling around, so a friend can help you. Adding that level of, I guess, forced teamwork, you could call it. This is sort of the way that a lot of modern tabletop RPGs do it, such as D&D 5th edition, where 0 is down. You have even less agency than you do in something like the newer Halos or the classic Gears of War style games, where you're crawling around on the floor and your limited agency is is movement. It's less than half of your movement you can move in a small area around you. Likely you're still going to get chopped up and shot. Whereas in tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, or modern Dungeons and Dragons I should say, it's a system separate from hit points entirely. It's a little fill-in-the-dots mini-game of sorts that has nothing intrinsically to do with your character. Your character themselves at 0 hit points is identical at first level than they are at 20th level. You're rolling a d20 and 11 or more is, oh no, it's 10 or more, they give you the benefit of the doubt. If the 10 or more is good, 9 or less is bad, and then 1 and 20 have special effects. Extra bad or come back alive on 1 health, which is the best part of that system, the come back alive on 1 health. And the best part about that is that it grants agency back to the player once again. A surprising, unexpected agency. They get to do their whole turn on 1 health. And as we know, a D&D character on 1 health is just as deadly as one on 500 health. The system works, being down and coming back with help. It, like I said, forces a level of teamwork, even if there wasn't any previously. They are literally done. They cannot do anything. If their turn comes around, it is skipped. There's a 5% chance they will get their turn still, and there's also a 5% chance that they die on the ground even faster. It also adds this metagame for the GM. What does the GM do in response to a character being on 0 health? What is the expectation that the players have? Is the GM going to see a player on 0 health, see a player down, and 1 or 2 hits away from death? Are there creatures that their opponents that they're controlling? Are they going to stab them and kill them and finish them off? Is that fair play? Is that metagaming? Do the monsters understand that the character is not truly dead, despite them being unconscious and likely not moving? Do they get that? Often when I run Dungeons and Dragons, I treat the monsters as if they do not understand that the player is not just dead. That they believe the player works on the same logic that they do, that Zero is dead. I guess you can have them come to an understanding that the player is still alive down there if they are ever healed from zero health, healed from unconscious. But then again, it comes to a point of, do you want to kill that character in this weak source way? This way where they're robbed of their agency, likely they've already skipped their turn. They have no way to defend themselves, they can activate no abilities, they can give themselves no help, and the characters around them can likely not help them in many ways either, because it's not their turn. And they just get kicked in the head on the floor and die. It's not a very heroic death. Even if, when they did have health, and the circumstances that led them to be on the ground here, to be at zero health and unconscious, were very heroic, the way it's dragged out in this non-playable state is very boring for the player. Much tension, perhaps, especially when it comes to the death saving throw rolls, but not much engagement and zero agency. Other games I've seen do things differently. Other games, instead of having the players be completely robbed of their agency at zero health, strip options away and give the characters a limited set of abilities that they can use, such as crawling around, perhaps making a single minor action of some sort, perhaps at a cost to their own health. I've even seen some games use a system where they can take their turn as normal, but at a cost to their character's survivability going forward. A system like that is interesting to me, as there is a choice to be made, a choice of whether you push on, risking death, or you cower, potentially living. The way death works in Driven to Darkness is, in a lot of ways, a response to the way it's done in 5th edition, and how much it has dissatisfied me, both as a GM and a player. And it's focused on retaining player agency at all costs. Because the narrative of death, I think, the narrative of a character's ability to choose to take a great risk to their own character's life is important to me. 5th edition, that risk can be taken, and it can be heroic. It can be memorable. But that memory is often swallowed up by multiple rounds of the character being robbed of that agency that led them into their dying state in the first place. The way this functions in Driven into Darkness is characters have health, and when that is reduced to zero, they are weakened somewhat. They incur a penalty to any check going forward, but they can push on. Zero health is not death, but also zero health does not take your agency away. You are wounded, mortally wounded, as the game would call it, but you're not dead. But any further strike you take will reduce your character's statistics. They will be reduced. You'll be weakened in more ways than one. Your primary stats that your character uses predominantly might be reduced, or the ones that you left low might be reduced. Death finally comes when a stat is reduced to a -8, the lowest it can possibly be. I believe strongly that players should be able to choose in more ways than one how much of a risk they want to take with their character. When they are mortally wounded, when they are dying, to choose to push on, to choose to risk the character that they might thoroughly enjoy playing, risk death to achieve glory, to achieve victory, to save a friend, to be heroic in the face of death. I feel like systems that choose to rob the agency from the players in the moment of death take away that ability for the player to truly choose to be heroic in death. To choose to sacrifice themselves, to make that last stand, to push on to that last shred of life. Instead, they're just left lying in the mud, flipping a coin, waiting for a friend. Instead of running into the moor, into the void, screaming their last in a heroic attempt to achieve their goals. Death should be a story in tabletop RPGs. It should be a glorious memory. It's painful. Tragedy. If you remember it as frustrating, as boring, if you're ever compelled to just disengage during your character's moment of death, I think that's a failure of design. I think it pushes away from what makes the heroic death an important part of storytelling in these sorts of games. It's about choice. It's about being worn down to a nub. It's about being broken and bloodied, but jumping into it all despite that, despite knowing that it could be it, that the next hit could be it. The next time you fail, you're truly done. So I'm driven to darkness. I want death to be a story worth remembering. Not sudden, but also not boring. It needs to be a choice. It needs to contain choice. And that's all.